Here is the weekly roundup of 5 major developments in AI that you shouldn't miss, plus a few quick hits and a big finale. You found the AI Big 5. This week we cover tons of model news, as everybody that seems to have a model released it this week, and a few obscure items that maybe slipped through the cracks, and of course, the big hit at the end, you gotta see Ghibli-style. Let's dive in. Before we get into the big stories, let's do a couple quick hits. I had to hit the Thales Robotics story quickly. They're using robotic dogs, similar to the ones that you've seen in Boston Dynamics, to help with the blind.
We're Thales Robotics, and we're building the world's first robot guide dog. We believe everyone deserves freedom of movement. The current system simply can't scale to everyone who needs a guide dog.
This one's just a quick hit, so I couldn't cover it all. Check it out on YouTube. Very interesting story on how we're using AI today. Let's get to the next one. The next quick hit is MCP adoption. It's really blowing up as expected. Here you see a tweet from Sam Altman saying MCP is going to be available today in the Agents SDK, coming soon in the Responses API, and part of the ChatGPT desktop app coming soon. Now, if you don't know what MCP is, it's just basically a way to make intelligent systems talk to tools. It's kind of a standardized protocol. We've covered in a previous video if you want to check that out. Let's look at a few other places that also announced adopting it this week. Microsoft also announced that the Azure AI will be using MCP and adopting it this week to be able to utilize tools from within Azure and the agent systems that they're releasing there as well. There's even more. Even Zapier this week came out and said that they've adopted MCP within their system. And one of the interesting things about Zapier, of course, is Zapier is a system that already is a connective tissue and can create workflows to make certain systems that don't necessarily speak with one another be able to use one another as a tool, basically. It's kind of a workflow product. Opening the front door as an MCP all of a sudden opens up thousands and thousands of tools to intelligent systems. So this one alone would be very interesting. But the fact that there's 3 different groups announcing adoption of this MCP protocol just this week really shows the steam this thing's gaining. Look, we got to move on. And in a surprising story for one of the quicks this week is AI is being used in mining. It says here that Earth AI has identified deposits of copper and cobalt in Northern Territory, northwest of Sydney. It seems that exploration companies in Australia have been required to submit their data to a national archive for many years, since the 1970s. But the leader of Earth AI said for some reason nobody's using them. He figured if he could build an algorithm that could absorb all the knowledge and learn from the failures and successes of millions of geologists in the past, that he might be able to make a better prediction about where to find minerals in the future. And this week they announced they had. So really exciting news. Can't stay here. Let's move on. Okay, that's enough for the quicks. We have 5 stories, and the last one is our big story, Ghibli-style, of course. But first, let's dive into story 1. Okay, our first story is kind of a surprising one this week. It's about the fashion industry. H&M announced last week that it would create AI twins of 30 models with the intention of using them in social media posts and marketing imagery if the models give their permission. The thing that they're doing here is going to 30 different models. They're using this as just kind of a test bed to see how it goes and asking for permission. And it goes much further than that. They're actually giving them rights to these models to be used by them in the future, even in competitive environments. Jorgen Andersen of H&M described this as something that will enhance our creative process and how we work with marketing, but fundamentally not change our human-centric approach in any way. Back to the union that represents the creative industry says, even if models are compensated for the use of their image, it's hard to see how using technology will not have a significant detriment to other fashion creatives and industry workers, from makeup and hair to rigging and lights. This is H&M putting a toe in the water for the whole industry, and many industries, in fact. I mean, we'll be seeing this in the future in many other industries as well. And the union's representation here is saying, but it affects a whole pipeline of people, not just that one person, I think is a really meaningful statement, but it is something that's coming. It's very, very likely this is a future for many industries and many places. So this is the chance for us to have these conversations of, it's just a start. I found this one interesting. Let's go to the next one. Story number 2. Big story 2 is really all about models. So really I'm going to cram several stories into this one, so we'll hit them kind of quickly. The first one is DeepSync releases an improved V3 instance, and this is only 3 months after releasing the previous version. If you remember, DeepSync was the Chinese model that came out and kind of made a big noise, big splash over being a much cheaper model to build, those kinds of things. This is their non-reasoning model, so it's not the R1 model, it's the V3 model underneath it, so kind of the base model behind that reasoning model. As you can see, the Update V3 model is a non-reasoning model. It scored from 5 to 20% higher on the AI benchmarks. I won't really dive deep into that, I'll show you a chart in a second, but really it's measuring somewhere near GPT-4.5 and Claude Sonnet 3.7, which of course are the other kind of frontier models that have just recently or relatively recently updated within the last month and a half each. So this is kind of commensurate with all of the other frontier models is what they're measuring. As you can see here, the dark blue bar is the new release, and to the left of it, the light blue bar is the previous release. So you can see some of the major improvements in math and coding, and it outperforms in almost all places the GPT-4.5 model. Okay, next model update, OpenAI. It seems GPT-4o got some updates. Now, we'll see in a minute that GPT-4o got some amazing updates. Certainly worth watching. If you haven't heard of this one, you'll want to hang on for that. It also seems that they updated some other things. Looking in the GPT release notes, you can see they say they made improvements to 4o. It now feels more intuitive, creative, and collaborative with an enhanced instruction following, smarter coding capabilities, and a clearer communication style, which is kind of interesting. Technical encoding problems, it's better at following detailed instructions, especially for prompts containing multiple or complex requests when you might have a compound request, which I often have in my prompts. It also has higher accuracy in classification tasks. Early testers say that the model seems to better understand the implied intent behind their prompts. It's more concise and clear, using fewer markdown hierarchies and emojis for responses. Some of those emojis are going away. And the last model announcement update just from this week, but this one is kind of monumentally important, is Gemini 2.5 Pro. Gemini 2.5 here is a thinking model or a reasoning model, if you will. Expectation is it's on the order of O3 high or maybe O1 from OpenAI. Head on out to the Google Studio. You can run a few tests against this to see what it really works like. Paid users can actually use it within their Gemini app. It says, you'll see that they say it's offering a massive context window, multimodality, and reasoning capabilities. It says Google points to a raft of benchmarks that show the new Gemini clobbering other large language models. Gemini 2.5, like all Google's models going forward, has reasoning built in. The AI essentially fact checks itself along the way to generating an output. Google says a lot of things about Gemini 2.5 Pro. It's smarter, it's context aware, it thinks, but it's hard to quantify what constitutes improvement in generative AI bots. There are some clear technical upsides though. Gemini 2.5 Pro comes with a 1 million token context window, which is common for the big Gemini models, but massive compared to other competing models. And this is when you're talking about thinking models. Of course, this is the input context window. The output context window here says still maxes at 64,000 tokens, but that's just kind of an enormous amount of data coming back out. But a 1 million token input is maybe several novels that you can send in one prompt, for example. Looking at the charts here in reasoning and knowledge, you can see that it outperforms pretty much everything. OpenAI O3 Mini is the one that it is also outperforming. You'll also see in science that it's outperforming quite a few things. O3 Mini, again, its closest competitor in most cases. And math, it looks like Grok 3 Beta, which is a very good model when it includes thinking, can potentially outperform it in math. Okay, number 3. Anthropic takes a bit of time to look into how these language models are thinking. We don't have a lot of introspection into what's going on. They've run some experimentation and built some tooling to be able to make some small changes to be able to tell what might be happening or kind of infer some of the actions that are happening inside of these. They are starting to believe that there's some form of thinking going on, actual thinking inside of these models. That's kind of fascinating. It says this means we don't understand how these models do most of the things that they do. Claude speaks dozens of languages, but what language, if any, is it using in its head? Claude writes text one word at a time. Is it only focusing on predicting the next word, or does it ever plan ahead? And Claude can write out its reasoning step by step. Does this explanation represent the actual steps it took to get to the answer? Or is it sometimes fabricating a plausible argument for a foregone conclusion? They go on to say Claude, on occasion, will give a plausible sounding argument designed to agree with the user rather than to follow logical steps. We're able to catch it in the act as it makes up fake reasoning. How is Claude multilingual? Recent research on smaller models has shown hints of shared grammatical mechanisms across languages. This provides additional evidence for a kind of conceptual universality, a shared abstract space where meanings exist and where thinking can happen before being translated into a specific language. More practically, it suggests that Claude can learn something in one language and apply that knowledge when speaking another language. Another open question here is, are Claude's explanations always faithful? Claude 3.7 Sonnet can think out loud for extended periods before giving a final answer. Sometimes this chain of thought ends up being misleading. Claude sometimes makes up plausible sounding steps to get where it wants to go. Claude sometimes engages in what the philosopher Harry Frank would call BSing, just coming up with an answer, any answer, without caring whether or not it's true or false. Even though it does claim to have run a calculation, our interpretability technique reveals no evidence at all that calculations have occurred. Even more interestingly, when given a hint about the answer, Claude sometimes works backward, finding intermediate steps that would lead to the target, thus displaying a form of motivated reasoning. Okay, another fascinating one is their description of hallucinations and looking into why they happen. They say, why do language models sometimes hallucinate? That is, make up information. At a basic level, language model training incentivizes hallucination. Models are always supposed to give a guess for the next word. Viewed this way, the major challenge is how to get models to not hallucinate. Models like Claude have relatively successful, though imperfect, anti-hallucination training. They will often refuse to answer a question if they don't know the answer rather than speculate. We wanted to understand how this works. It turns out that in Claude, refusal to answer is the default behavior. We find a circuit that is quote-unquote on by default, and that causes the model to state that it has insufficient information to answer any given question. However, when the model is asked about something it knows well, say the basketball player Michael Jordan, a competing feature representing known entities activates and inhibits this default circuit, thus allowing it to give an answer. In contrast, when asked about an unknown entity, Michael Batkin declines to answer. By intervening in the model and activating the known answer features, or really inhibiting the unknown name or can't answer features, we're able to cause the model to hallucinate quite consistently that Michael Batkin plays chess. Personally, I find this kind of information and science that they're doing excellent, really meaningful to everyone, all of the language models out there. This is not specific to Claude, and we should really be applauding the Anthropic team for opening this up and showing it to everybody and trying to describe what's going on inside of these models, because in the future, this kind of safety and alignment questioning and interpretability of what might be occurring inside of these models will get more and more difficult, but at the same time, the more tools we have, maybe we can have some idea of why the things that are being returned from these models, when they're actually true or when they're actually dangerous. So great work to Anthropic on this one. Let's move on. All right, number 4, let's get back to some of this hard, practical truth kind of stuff, product stuff. Everybody likes product stuff. This one ends up hitting my big list because I think it's a very functional use of AI. Today, we're excited to introduce two first-of-their-kind reasoning agents for work, researcher and analyst. They analyzed vast amounts of information with secure, compliant access to your work data, your emails, meetings, files, chats, and more, and the web to deliver highly skilled expertise on demand. Researcher helps you tackle complex multi-step research at work, delivering insights with greater quality and accuracy than previously possible. It combines OpenAI's deep research model. We saw that. That's one of their announcements that they came out with a couple weeks ago. And 365's Copilot advanced orchestration. So Copilot already has an orchestration mechanism or something that knows how to coordinate these different moving parts. It integrates data from external sources such as Salesforce, ServiceNow, Confluence, and many more directly into Microsoft 365 Copilot. Very similarly, I won't go nearly in as much depth to Analyst, but Analyst is the other side of the equation. So one of these is the researcher that can go out and do a whole bunch of searching, combining information and creating a report for you. That's the first one we just looked at. Analyst is very similar in that it can pull a lot of data information together, knows how to run Python programs and write Python programs to do a whole bunch of analysis of of data stacks, of your own data. So it's secure and everything that you might imagine from an enterprise implementation. So being able to do deep research on your own internal information and being able to do analysis and coordinate the two of them together with the 365 coordination is actually kind of an interesting interplay. So I think this one has some potentials. I don't think Microsoft is the only one that's implementing this or will be the winner in this space by any stretch. Who knows what that landscape really looks like, but it is a great first step. And if you're an enterprise kind of wondering, how do I get started? At the very least, it's worth looking into this because it feels like it's rolling in already into Microsoft 365. Let's head on to the next one. Now it's time for the big one. It's the one everybody wants to see. Let's go Ghibli. Okay, number 5, the big story. Here it is. OpenAI and ChatGPT 4 gets a new image model. And it's really a new system altogether. It's very different. It is not an upgrade to DALL-E. It is very separate. It's within ChatGPT. So if you go to ChatGPT and use the 4.0 model and ask it for an image, you'll be using this new system. Mileage may vary for a minute because we found out that all of the servers started melting essentially. They had to slow down the rollout quite a bit, constrain a bunch of use. You'll only get a few uses before it starts saying you're either in a queue or maybe come back tomorrow, you've had your generation fund for the day. But what happened and the reason it turned into such a big parade was everybody learned about Ghibli-style. Everybody started using Studio Ghibli as a type of output. You know, if you do any looking on the internet for Ghibli right now, you will no doubt see images that were created with OpenAI. It's also a very allowing model. It has fewer guardrails so that you can see here it shows an image of real people. No doubt this was either a screenshot somebody brought in and asked it to be Ghiblified or a system that they created, an image that they created within the system and then Ghiblified it itself. So if you scroll down through this, people have had fun with some of the old traditional memes and Ghiblified those. Just really a lot of fun. But because it was so much fun and everybody was having so much fun with it, it really started creating a whole bunch of trouble for the servers. And this is why everything slowed down. So if you see a bunch of Ghibli art, this is why. But let's go take a look at the actual announcement from OpenAI. It's actually even more exciting than being able to create Ghibli art of just about anything. All right, OpenAI and 4.0 announced image generation, as we're mentioning here. So this is photorealistic outputs, really precise. The most amazing aspect of this, it's something that I'm calling vibe imaging. So it's this idea of just being able to communicate in natural language rather than image generation language. The first example here that they share is they asked for an image of someone writing on a whiteboard, gave it the text. In fact, they wrote all this text into their prompt of what they would want on the whiteboard, and it wrote all of this out. So this is an image generated with the new image model. And what's so fascinating about it is how precise the text is, how clean the image is. And they even followed this up with a simple thing that says, oh, just make a selfie view of the photographer as she turns around to high five him. And so she turns around, the photographer who was in the reflection is now correctly in the reflection as standing there doing the high five. It keeps continuity of what was on the whiteboard without having to say anything. It just turned the woman around. High five missed, but you know, that happened, so maybe that was what was intended. But there's a whole bunch of other things. If you come by this website, I'll put this in the show notes as well so that you can come take a look. There are a bunch of different mechanisms up. You'll see on the top these little tabs that you can go through to see the different generations and information that they're sharing. You can do cartoons very well. It understands this kind of style. But again, what's really interesting here is the continuity throughout these panels as well as the text. So this is really clean. The color scheme is the same throughout all 4 of these panels. The characters are the same throughout the 4 panels, and the text is super clear. So really neat stuff. Some other things are the videos that they've shared here. And in fact, I'll play this one for us so that we can see it and advise you to come look at the others because they are so short and enjoyable to see how people at OpenAI are actually using this to kind of show off some of these things. So let's play this one. How's it going?
Pretty good. One thing that I'm really excited about ImageN is the ability to keep consistency in characters. I'm David Medina, or DMed, and I work on multimodal. What I want to show is one of my favorite prompts, which is, can you create a low poly penguin mage? Make it very, very low poly. Surprisingly, it's sometimes hard to get very good low poly outputs. It's not like other image generation models where it tries to generate something based on just the text. Instead, it uses the large language model understanding of what does the user want, what is the intent. I also like some board games, so miniature-like games. So what I'll do now is generate a miniature from this. So ideally, we'll see a penguin that looks like this with the same staff and a hat. So can you make me a realistic miniature as if a professional made this and painted it? This is what I think excites me the most about ImageN. The other image generation models will try to create literally what you said. But what's special about this is, one, it'll keep the context of this character, and then two, it'll understand what I'm trying to ask it for and generate very similar model, but in a miniature realistic style. It infers what I want. I don't have to tell it every little detail. One other realistic thing we could do is, can you make a crystal version of this with light reflecting and very realistic? Again, I'm just giving a very, very simple thing. Normally, this is not enough for other models to generate something very detailed, but the model understands what I'm asking for. It'll think what type of style it should have. So this ability to really understand what the character is and make edits and understand what the user wants, for me, it's just an amazing capability.
Okay, so that's excellent. Some of the things that they're talking about here are the things that I'm most excited about. They're a little bit hidden until you use it enough times to start realizing, oh, I'm not doing image generation like I used to do. I just get to talk to something, and I'm starting to create with images, essentially. And I'm just using language. Instead of use this camera lens, use a very low angle, have the lighting look like studio lighting, all of the things you might have seen in the past for really good images. This one, if you have to go back and forth 3 or 4 times to get to the image you want to because the first one didn't work, that's actually possible. In those other models, you've got to get the prompt right? You have to get the perfect prompt. And that's not the case here. Down here at the bottom, they have their limitations. And I think this, frankly, is wonderful. We should really be celebrating them for this. If you come by this, you'll be able to see the different things that they're aware that they can't do quite well and how they kind of don't work. So if you pass by these limitations and just take a look, you might be able to better use OpenAI or ChatGPT for your image generation, knowing, oh, here's some of the things it gets wrong. Here's some of the steps that I might be able to take to get closer to what I was looking for and not just get frustrated and say, well, I don't know the name of all the different art styles in the world, so I can't move forward. All right, as an example, I started a project for no good reason going onto the web and finding an image of a Cheetos bag that you see here on the left. And I dropped that in, just dropped it in as a uploaded image, and then said, how about if we remove the Chester cheetah and replace it with a penguin? Then we get to this penguin that we have here and other generations and multiple steps through generations that I just kept noodling along. I have a video that's very fun showing exactly this generation, the whole life cycle of doing this generation, but you can see the continuity, the consistency of the bag itself for the most part and the logo itself for the most part. Even though it's regenerating that information, you can definitely tell that it is a regeneration. It's not just figured out how to replace this one character. You can see that the logo has actually changed a bit and it had to redraw it, but it understands that aspect of it. And through the many generations that I have in this one image generation conversation, it kept all of those details correct over and over again. In any case, this was great. I really enjoyed being able to vibe image just like I vibe code. The idea of being able to play around with images with words instead of having to be very meticulous, finding tools and erasing exactly the parts that I want. I think you're going to love it. Go buy ChatGPT. Just go to chat.com, I believe, and you'll get to ChatGPT and you'll be on 4.0 and just say, give me an image of a penguin riding a unicycle, and you'll be off. All right, this week was absolutely chock-a-block with model updates. I know we just went through a lot of those things, but I can't stress enough, some of these model changes were really major. There's multiple that I couldn't hit. There were a bunch of other image models that updated and look excellent, except ChatGPT 4.0 just sucked up all the oxygen. That one's a lot of fun to play with. Some of these other smalls that I showed were very interesting that we can see what AI is doing in the real world. I hope you enjoy this kind of stuff. Thanks for coming along for the ride on this one, and I'll see you in the next one.